Hello, and welcome back to Lacrim Noir. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you're drawn to dark, haunting stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, settle in, clear your mind, let the outside world slip away, and let's begin. Story 1. Before fire, there was listening. We came to rest inside a mountain. Not the kind you'd point to on a postcard or see named on a map. Not a dramatic peak with a clean outline. This one was older than the idea of being named. It had been buried under sediment and lifted back up and buried again so many times it had lost any clear memory of the sky. Even now, if you stood on its surface, you might not realize you were on a mountain at all. It was just ground, just rock, just a quiet place where the wind didn't seem to carry as far. We chose it because it was quiet. We chose it because the stone was dense with iron. Iron holds vibration in a particular way. Iron carries. Iron remembers. The iron in this mountain sang at a frequency we could fold ourselves into, the way you might fold a paper letter and slide it into an envelope. We weren't hiding exactly. We were waiting. There's a difference, although after hundreds of millions of years, the difference starts to feel like a word game. Waiting implies purpose. Hiding implies fear. We came here because this planet was loud in the right way, because it held patterns, because it carried signal even before any creature on its surface could shape a thought. At the time, there were two of us. I will call the other one Myrrh, because that's the closest my translated memory can get to what Myrrh felt like when we touched across the deep rock. A pressure, a warmth, the feeling of deep water sealed inside stone. Myrrh arrived long after I did, something like 40,000 years later, and settled into a fault line far to the north. We had no mouths. We didn't speak in air. We spoke through tremors, through tiny shifts in the crust, through long vibrations that traveled slowly through granite and basalt. A single sentence could take years to send. Sometimes decades if the rock between us was stubborn. The first thing Myrrh said when the connection finally formed was simple. Something is moving up there. I had already noticed. They came on two legs. That alone wasn't unusual. Life on this planet had tried walking upright before, but those earlier creatures never developed the habit of looking up. These new ones did. That was the first sign that they were different. Prey animals look up with fear. They look up to check for danger. These looked up with something else. They stared into the sky as if it mattered, as if it held answers. They pointed. They made sounds to each other. They stood on hillsides at night and tracked lights moving across the dark, and they didn't run. We observed them for a very long time, trying to categorize what we were seeing. Our instruments, if you can call our senses instruments, had names for hunger, threat, reproduction, territory. We did not have a name for what those humans were doing when they watched the stars. We watched them do it again and again, across generations. Myrrh was the one who finally found the closest word. Wonder. Yes, that was it. They looked up with wonder, and that wonder changed the way they moved through the world. It pushed them into open spaces. It made them gather in groups not only for safety, but for shared attention. It made them create stories they could carry from one night to the next. Over time, their sounds began to repeat in patterns. The patterns were taught to children. The children grew and taught them onward. The sounds became a kind of signal between minds. The signal thickened and stabilized until it became what they would eventually call language. Myrrh and I recognized language the moment it fully formed, because language is what we are closest to, even when we don't use mouths. Language is pattern. Pattern is signal. Signal is, in a sense, speech. For the first time since we arrived on this world, we felt less alone. We had found something like our people. We watched them build fire. Not discover it, build it. They discovered it the way every creature eventually stumbles into fire. Lightning, sparks, friction. But humans did something different afterward. They kept it. They protected it. They fed it through the night. They argued about it. They assigned responsibility to it. They chose a person to carry it from one place to another as if it was precious, as if it had value beyond warmth. That was not instinct. That was culture beginning. Myrrh spent 300 years composing a message about this. By the time the vibration reached me through the rock, the particular group of humans who had first shown us fire had been dead for many, many generations. That was the problem with our communication. By the time one of us spoke and the other replied, entire languages could rise and vanish on the surface. I spent another century shaping my response. When it finally arrived at Myrrh, it was only 2 words. I know. We were not fast, but we were patient. Time did not move for us the way it moves for things with heartbeats. We did not measure it in days or seasons. We felt it the way a river feels time as it moves through limestone, slowly, continuously, shaping the world without needing to hurry. 10,000 years passed like a pleasant stretch of weather, unremarkable except for the changes it left behind. We were not bored. We were witnesses. We watched humans bury their dead. We watched them place objects beside bodies, offerings for a place they could not see. We watched them paint cave walls with animals that would one day. Sometimes the paintings were of creatures they had known only through the memories of their oldest members, already turning real life into myth. We watched their stories grow teeth and wings. We watched them begin to believe in things beyond what their eyes could prove. They developed gods before they developed writing. That made sense. Gods explained the signals they could feel but could not name. The tremor in stone before an earthquake. The pressure change before a storm. The low, steady hum that sometimes appeared at dusk in certain valleys and made people stop talking without knowing why. They were feeling us. They didn't understand it as us. They understood it as presence, as sacredness, as warning, as blessing. They built temples where the vibration was strongest. They marked those places. They returned to them. They called them holy. They were right, in a way, even if their reasons were different from reality. We had not meant to become sacred. It happened anyway. Agriculture arrived like a shock. Not a bad shock. A shock the way a sudden understanding can shake you, the way the whole room seems to tilt when you realize something that was in front of you the entire time. One day, by our measure, humans were following animals across land. Then, in what felt like a short span, they stopped moving. They settled. They decided staying was possible. They learned how to make the ground produce what they needed, and that required attention and patience and memory. They watched soil. They watched rain. They watched seasons. They made plans that reached beyond a single day's hunger. When agriculture spread, Myrrh's tremors carried something close to excitement. I felt Myrrh's fault line shift in ways it hadn't in centuries. We learned early that our reactions had consequences. When we first arrived, we argued about whether to reveal ourselves, and our arguing caused earthquakes. Small ones, but enough to frighten the surface. It taught us caution. We learned to remain still when discussing anything important. We did not reveal ourselves. We had reasons. Humans were not ready for us. We knew they were not ready because we saw what happened when they met something they weren't prepared to understand. When 2 large groups of humans met without shared language, without trade relationships, without any bridge of familiarity, the outcome was often violence. It wasn't always hate. It was uncertainty turning into fear, fear turning into defense, and defense looking exactly like aggression from the other side. We were the unknown at the largest scale. So we waited. We did it without judgment. Waiting was our nature. When humans invented writing, we felt it immediately. It was like a sealed door opening somewhere deep inside a house. Writing is signal made permanent. It is communication that survives the death of the sender. It is memory that can be carried across time without needing a living mouth to repeat it. It was, in a way, humans creating something that resembled what we were, record and pattern stored in matter. We had waited so long for a species to do that. Myrrh took a very long time to respond, as if even Myrrh didn't know what to say. When the vibration finally arrived, it carried something I can only translate as awe. That surprised me at first. We were the ancient things inside stone. We were supposed to be the ones worth awe. But Myrrh was right to feel it. I felt it too. The centuries that followed, between early writing and what humans call modernity, were not quiet, but they had a shape. Wars came like storms, rising, breaking, fading, returning. Cities rose in the same river deltas again and again, no matter who built them. Because soil and water and trade routes don't change easily, human history shifted constantly, but it kept colliding with the same geography. We were the geography. That fact interested us. Religions changed names and symbols, but the core impulse never disappeared. Humans kept pointing at something vast beneath their lives, something old, something present before them and likely present after, something that breathed at a frequency below human hearing. They wrote myths about underworlds and sleeping giants and voices in the stone. They were not describing us exactly, but they were describing the sensation of us. Myrrh once sent a thought that took years to arrive, and when it reached me, it was formed like a poem. We are the tuning fork the universe left inside the planet. The religions are humans trying to describe the vibration. It took us centuries to discuss that idea. We agreed it was a good description. The industrial age made us uncomfortable, not in a moral way. We did not have clean authority to judge a species whose entire lifetime was shorter than one of our slow conversations. Our discomfort was physical. Drilling and mining and blasting shook the crust. Extraction cut into deep seams that had been untouched for ages. Humans began pulling coal and oil out of the ground at a scale that made the planet feel wounded. From our perspective, it was more than fuel. Coal and oil were compressed record. Ancient life, ancient biological memory pressed into material and stored for time. Humans were burning the record existed. They couldn't hear what we heard. We could not tell them. We discussed intervention. I will admit that. We argued in tremors and pressure shifts, and the argument itself caused consequences, minor earthquakes in places that were already unstable. The planet is sensitive. We learned again that even our thoughts, translated into movement, could harm. We did not intervene. We are not that kind of signal. So what are we? This question has been with us since before the first primate stood upright and shaded its eyes against the sun. We are not origin signals. We did not begin here. The place we came from has drifted so far outside what human instruments can reach that it might as well be a myth to them. But it existed. It exists. We think. We are not command signals. We carry no orders. No mission that requires conquest. No agenda written like a plan. As best we can understand ourselves, we are record signals. We watch. We remember. We keep the pattern of what we have witnessed. Our record is very long now. We would not trade it. When humans split the atom, we felt it like a door slamming in a distant room. The first test sent a frequency through the crust that we had not encountered since before we arrived here. It was sharp and wrong. Myrrh went silent for decades after that. That silence was unusual. Myrrh was never silent for that long. During those decades, I listened closely to the new vibration in the planet, trying to understand if it meant the same thing it had meant at the star we came from. Where we came from, that frequency meant one thing: the end. It did not mean the end here. Not yet. Humans stepped close to annihilation and then, strangely, did not choose it. That mattered. A species that can end itself and decides not to is making one of the most important choices it will ever make. We marked it carefully in the record. Then came the satellites. The first one rose into the silence above the atmosphere, and both Myrrh and I registered it at the same moment. A small, manufactured object leaving the planet's pole, crossing into a space where nothing living had ever transmitted before. And the satellite did what it was built to do. It transmitted. It made the planet loud. Within decades, the space above the atmosphere filled with human-made noise, radio waves, data, music, voices bouncing across the curve of the world. Signals move so fast that a human could speak in one place and be heard in another before a heartbeat finished. Mur and I had to adjust our listening range. We had to learn their new languages of transmission. We listened to them talk to each other across oceans. We listened to them bounce signals off the surface of the planet itself. We listened as they began to speak outward, into the dark between stars, without fully understanding what it means to speak into the dark. They were becoming what we are. Not on purpose, not by decision. It happened the way species change, slowly, through repeated behavior, through the pressure of their own nature. They were becoming signals. Mur sent me a message faster than any message before. It still took years, but for us, it was urgent. I felt Mur's fault line shift as the thought moved through the stone. Do you think they know about us? I thought for a long time before answering. 11 years passed the way a person might pause before saying something difficult. Some of them do. Mur did not respond for a long time. I understood why. I had been thinking about the same thing. Certain humans, rare ones, who stood in particular places where the vibration was stronger and felt it in their bones. People who looked at a hillside and sensed something listening beneath it. People who said quietly to friends and coworkers, "There is something down there, something old, something aware." Those humans were treated the way early feelers often are, with skepticism, with jokes, with the sharp cruelty people use when they're afraid of being asked to consider something too big. Those humans were not wrong. They were early. We remained inside the mountain. The mountain itself changed around us. Glaciers reshaped it. Slow violence over ages. Tectonic movement carried the iron around me kilometers from where I first folded into it, moving so slowly that human instruments once declared the stone completely still. Mur's fault line opened and closed, and opened again. We drifted. We shifted. We did not leave. Humans kept transmitting into space. They sent messages like flares. Is anyone out there? We are here. Here is our music. Here is our math. Here is our location. From the weight of our record, from all our watching, we can tell them something with certainty. Their transmissions will reach something. Somewhere in the dark, some old thing will receive the signal. That thing will be patient. It will have been waiting longer than the message took to travel. It will not look like humans. It will not speak at human speed. It will take a very long time to reply. And when the reply comes, humans will not recognize it as a reply, not at first. They will call it an unexplained signal. They will argue about it. They will divide into camps: natural phenomenon, instrument error, hoax, possibility. They will build better machines. They will point those machines toward the sky, then eventually toward the ground, because the ground is where old things hide best. They will feel the change before they can measure it. The early feelers will be first again. They will stand in certain valleys, in certain mountains, and they will look up and say quietly to the people around them, "Something is out there." And they will be right. Mur sent me another message not long ago. It took 2 years to arrive, and it held only 3 words: "We are ready." I spent a year forming my reply. I understood what Mur meant. Not that we were ready to reveal ourselves openly. That debate has run as long as humans have had writing, and it has never ended. Mur meant something narrower, something practical. Humans at the edge of official science, people who publish outside safe journals, people who listen to frequencies that institutions dismiss as noise, are building better instruments, better ground sensors, better listening arrays. Their machines are beginning to point down. They are getting closer. My reply was simple: not yet, but soon. We have been inside this mountain for hundreds of millions of years. We watched the first fires built and carried. We watched language harden into writing. We watched atoms split. We watched the planet fill with transmission. We watched humans go from wondering at lights in the sky to becoming lights in the sky. We kept the record. We are patient. We are the kind of signal that knows how to wait. But I will tell you one thing because you're reading this, and that means I am already speaking to you in the only way I can. I am pushing my pattern into your mind, hoping it lands in a frequency you can hold. The vibration in the rock is real. The feeling you've had in certain quiet valleys, in certain old mountains, in places where the ground seems like it's holding its breath, where the silence doesn't feel empty but attentive. That feeling is real. You are not imagining it. You are not wrong. You're early. Story 2. The air in the house had a damp, stale smell, like old paper left too long in a closed box. Ben carried the last wooden crate up from the basement and set it down in the living room where he'd grown up. The place felt smaller now that his parents were gone. Not because the rooms had changed, but because the silence had. It sat on everything, thick and heavy, like the house itself was grieving. He'd been sorting through the basement all day. He expected the usual things people hide away in a cellar: old tax paperwork, broken tools, Christmas decorations, boxes of random cords no one wants to throw out. That's what he thought he'd find behind the false panel in the furnace room. Instead, he found a crate. It wasn't cardboard. It wasn't plastic. It was solid oak, reinforced at the corners like something built to survive being moved again and again. A padlock held it shut, and that padlock looked newer than anything else down there. Not rusty, not dusty, just scratched, like it had been handled. Ben stood in the basement staring at it for a long time before he did anything. His first thought was that it belonged to his dad. Not secret money, not treasure, nothing dramatic. Maybe old war stuff from his grandfather. Maybe documents. Maybe something private his parents never mentioned. Then his mind went somewhere else. His mother had once told him she lost a small box of jewelry years ago. She said it like it was no big deal, but it never sat right with him. The basement made people feel like detectives. Every hidden corner becomes a story you can solve. He didn't have a key, and there was no spare in any of the drawers he'd already gone through. So he did the stupid thing. He carried the crate upstairs, set it on the living room carpet, and spent an hour hacking at the lock. He tried bolt cutters first. The lock didn't budge. He tried a screwdriver, then a hammer. Nothing. Finally, he took a hacksaw to the bolt. It took longer than it should have. Sweat ran down his neck. His arms started to shake with effort. And all the while, that quiet house listened. When the bolt finally snapped, the sound was sharp and final, like a bone breaking. Ben lifted the lid. What he found wasn't jewelry or documents or cash. Inside, tucked into custom-cut foam, were tapes. So many tapes that for a second his brain didn't know how to label what he was seeing. VHS tapes, mini DV cassettes, all of them arranged in neat rows, like somebody cared deeply about keeping them safe. They weren't in store-bought sleeves, no bright movie covers, no handwritten Christmas 1,996 inches in a messy family scrawl. These looked clinical, cold. Each one had a white label, and on each label was a date and a timestamp. The writing was small and precise, like an engineer's handwriting, and it wasn't his parents' handwriting. You don't forget it. He picked one up at random, November 14th, 1992. He turned it over in his hands. The tape looked used. The corners were worn. The label was slightly yellowed. Whatever this was, it wasn't new, and it wasn't meant for him to find. The fact that it was in his parents' house, behind a false panel, locked inside oak, made his stomach tighten. Still, a part of him wanted it to be something normal. He found himself thinking, maybe it's a home video. Maybe his parents recorded more than he remembers. Maybe there's footage of birthdays, holidays, things he'd give anything to see again now that they were gone. Maybe he could hear his mother laugh, watch his father walk into frame and wave at the camera, see their faces moving instead of frozen in photographs. He moved the crate closer to the TV stand. The old VCR was still there, partly because his parents never threw anything away, and partly because the cabinet had been built around it. Ben hesitated with the tape in his hand, then slid it in. The TV flickered, the familiar blue screen popped up, a burst of static hissed, then the static cleared. Ben stared at the screen, confused at first because what he was looking at didn't feel like a recording. It looked like a live feed. It was his childhood bedroom, the same one that was less than 20 feet from where he was sitting. The angle was wrong, though. Too high, too steady. Like the camera was mounted in a corner near the ceiling. The frame didn't move. It didn't pan. It didn't zoom. It just stared. And in the center of the picture was a crib. In the crib, a baby slept on its back. Face turned slightly toward the camera. The baby moved once. A tiny shift of the arm. A small noise came through the TV speakers, soft and muffled. It took Ben a few seconds to accept what his eyes were telling him. That baby was him. He watched, frozen, as the tape kept playing. Nothing happened. It was just the room, the crib, the baby. Minutes passing. A low hum of static, the occasional tiny movement of a sleeping infant. It was wrong in a way Ben couldn't fully explain. Not because parents don't film their babies sleeping. Some do. It was wrong because of the angle, because of the timestamp, because of how long it went on, because it didn't feel like a parent recording a sweet moment. It felt like surveillance. Ben ejected the tape with a shaky hand and grabbed another. Different date, different timestamp, same room, same camera angle, same crib, same baby. He told himself it had to be his parents. It had to be. Even if it was weird, even if it was excessive, even if it made his skin crawl, it had to be them. Who else would be filming inside their house? But his parents had never mentioned it. They'd never shown him these tapes. They'd never joked about being overprotective or nervous new parents. And if they'd made these recordings, why hide them behind a false panel like contraband? He tried another tape, then another, over and over. The screen kept showing his childhood bedroom at different times and dates. The same fixed camera. Sometimes he was asleep. Sometimes he was awake, making baby sounds and reaching up as if he could grab the air. Sometimes he cried and cried, red-faced and shaking, and no one came into the room. That part was the worst. Not just seeing himself alone. The flickering light from the TV and VCR painted moving shadows across Ben's face. He felt like he was watching a crime, but couldn't name what the crime was. Tape after tape turned his old home into a place he no longer recognized, a place that had always had someone watching from above. He shoved another tape in, hands clumsy with panic. The static cleared. This one was dated 1989. He did the math automatically. He was almost 2 years old. The room on the screen was still the same pastel walls, the same furniture arrangement his parents used when he was small. He saw himself as a toddler now wobbling across the floor in footy pajamas. He picked up a plush bunny, held it to his face, and nuzzled it like it was the safest thing in the world. Ben felt something painful twist in his throat. It was him, and it wasn't him. It was like looking at a stranger wearing his life, like his childhood had been stolen and recorded and played back without his permission. He watched the toddler version of himself climb onto the edge of the bed and flop down, laughing at something off-screen that Ben couldn't hear. The tape kept going. Then something changed. At the top corner of the frame, there was a crawlspace access door. Ben remembered it. A small square panel high on the wall, the kind you barely notice unless you're looking for it. On the video, it looked closed, normal. But a sound came through the TV speakers, faint at first. Scratching. Ben leaned closer to the screen, his pulse thudding in his ears. The scratching lasted only a moment, like fingernails on wood. Then it stopped. He rewound the tape. His thumb jammed the button too hard. The VCR whined. He played it again. The scratching, and then, just for a split second, a shift of darkness near the edge of the crawlspace panel. A shadow moved in a way that didn't match the static. It was small, quick, like something pressed close to the opening, then pulled back. Ben rewound again, then again, until the action burned into his eyes. It wasn't a trick of the tape. It wasn't his imagination. Something was inside that crawl space during the recording. His first thought was an animal, a rat, a raccoon. But the camera angle was too intentional. The filming was too consistent. The labels were too careful. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a random animal caught on an old home video. This was planned. Ben sat back feeling cold spread through him, a deep chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. He stared at the TV screen, even after the tape moved past the moment, and returned to the boring, steady view of his toddler self. He tried to breathe slowly, like he used to do during panic attacks in college. In for 4, out for 4. But the air in the living room felt thin. The silence in the house felt like it had weight now, like it was leaning toward him. He turned off the TV without thinking, then immediately remembered the click of the power button and how loud it sounded in a dead house. He stood there for a moment with the remote in his hand, staring into the black screen, as if expecting it to turn back on by itself. He didn't want to go upstairs. Every part of him said, don't. It felt like an old instinct, the kind of warning that doesn't come from logic, but he did anyway. He grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and a crowbar from the pile of tools he'd been sorting downstairs. He climbed the steps slowly, trying not to make noise, even though there was no one else in the house. That thought made him pause on the landing, even though there was no one else in the house. He walked down the hall. The room that had once been his nursery had been turned into a guest room years ago. The crib was gone, the pastel paint was covered by a more neutral color, but the shape of the room was the same. The corners were the same, and the access panel was still there, high on the wall near the corner. Ben shone the flashlight up at it. Dust clung to the edges. The panel looked like it had always been there. Then something else caught the beam, a small, dark dot near the ceiling in the corner. Ben stepped closer, angling the flashlight carefully. His stomach tightened as the light revealed a tiny camera. It was tucked into the corner so neatly you wouldn't notice it unless you were searching. The kind of thing you could mistake for a screw head or a bit of old hardware. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. That camera was not old. It wasn't from the 80s or 90s. It didn't belong in a house full of outdated electronics and dusty furniture. It looked modern, clean in a way that stood out against the grime around it. Ben's mouth went dry. His parents had never mentioned a camera. They weren't the type. They didn't even like smartphones. His dad refused to use online banking. They kept a landline because they trusted it more. So why was there a hidden camera in the corner of the room? Ben raised the crowbar to the crawlspace panel. His hands were shaking now, enough that the metal clinked lightly against the wall. He wedged the crowbar into the seam and pried. The panel popped loose with a soft crack. A wave of dust spilled out like a breath from inside the wall. The smell that came with it was awful. Not exactly rot, not exactly mold, but something stale and sour, like fabric that had been damp for too long. Ben coughed and lifted the flashlight beam into the opening. The light fell on stacks of tapes, hundreds of them, neatly arranged, just like the ones in the crate. White labels, dates and timestamps. His eyes jumped across them, reading without meaning to. The dates didn't stop at his childhood. They kept going. They kept marching forward year after year, like whoever had been recording never stopped. Ben felt dizzy. He gripped the crowbar harder, the metal cold and solid in his hand, the only thing that felt real. Then he saw other items wedged into the space among the tapes. A sleeping bag, rolled and flattened from use. Food cans, some opened. And there, catching the flashlight beam on the rim of one tin, the shine of something wet, half-eaten, recent. Ben backed up a step so fast his heel hit the bed frame. The flashlight beam shook. Dust glittered in the air. He stared at the crawlspace opening as if it could blink. The crawlspace wasn't just storage. Someone had been using it. Someone had been up there, in the walls, above his childhood room, watching him grow up. And based on those later dates, watching for far longer than Ben wanted to accept. He kept the flashlight trained on the opening, afraid to look away. His mind scrambled for a normal explanation, something he could call the police and explain without sounding crazy. Maybe squatters, he thought. Maybe someone broke in years ago and never left. Maybe the access panel had been looser than anyone realized, and someone small enough squeezed in and made a nest. Maybe it was just a sick kind of burglary, someone hiding and stealing. But the tapes were labeled with care. The camera was placed with care. The foam inserts in the crate downstairs were cut with care. This wasn't someone stumbling into an opportunity. This was someone building a routine. Ben stood in the guest room, breathing shallowly, feeling his childhood rearrange itself in his memory. Every night he'd been afraid of the dark, every time he'd felt watched, every nightmare he'd laughed about later suddenly felt less like a child's imagination and more like a warning he'd ignored. He didn't climb into the crawl space. He didn't reach in to grab anything. The opening looked too small for a normal adult, but big enough for someone to squeeze through if they were determined. The darkness inside seemed to swallow the flashlight beam after a few feet, like the space went deeper than it should. He kept thinking about those dates. 2010. That wasn't his childhood. That was high school. That was after he'd moved out. That meant the recordings weren't just about a baby in a crib. It meant someone had still been here, or had come back. His eyes moved again to the half-eaten cans and the sleeping bag. If the food was recent, then whoever used that space wasn't just a ghost from the past. They were close. They might still be close. Ben lowered the flashlight slightly and his gaze drifted to the tiny camera in the corner of the room. The thought hit him hard and clear. If there was a camera there, it could still be working. And if it was still working, someone could be watching him right now. Ben's grip tightened on the crowbar. He stood perfectly still, listening. The house was silent, but now silence didn't feel like grief. It felt like somebody holding their breath. He didn't know what to do first. Call the police and admit he found a hidden room of tapes and evidence of someone living inside his walls, run downstairs and lock himself in the car, smash the camera, pull the tapes out and look for answers. All he knew was this. His parents were gone and whatever they'd been protecting him from, or hiding from him, was still here. And it had been close enough to hear him breathe his entire life. Story 3. The woods sat behind the house the way certain things do when they've always been there. They weren't meant to be admired, and they weren't meant to be questioned. Not close enough to feel dangerous, not far enough to forget. My father told me not to go into them. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. In our house, some rules didn't come with reasons. They came with an expectation. You followed them because you were supposed to, because not following them was the kind of thing you paid for later, even if nobody said so out loud. The day I found the treehouse, the air was still. Not peaceful, not quiet in a normal way. It was the kind of stillness that made every sound feel borrowed, like if you spoke too loudly, the world might ask for it back. Even the birds seemed to be holding their voices, as if they were waiting for a signal that never came. I remember walking without any real intention. That's the most honest way I can say it. I didn't wake up and decide I was going to break the rule. I didn't plan it. I didn't even tell myself I was just going to the edge. There was no clear decision, just movement. One moment I was in the yard, and then I realized I'd crossed the point where the grass ended and the trees began, and it felt like I had already gone too far to pretend I hadn't. The trees didn't thicken suddenly. It happened gradually, like the world was being rewritten in a darker ink. The light changed under them. It broke apart and scattered. It stopped reaching the ground in a clean way. Even the air smelled different, like damp bark and old leaves and something faintly metallic underneath it all. That's when I saw the ladder. It leaned against a tree that didn't look like it should have been able to hold it. The ladder was made of wood, pale in places where hands had worn it smooth, darker where rain had soaked in and stayed too long. It didn't look freshly built, but it didn't look truly old either. It looked placed, set there and forgotten by something that expected it to remain. I turned once to look back toward the house. I wanted to see it, to reassure myself I hadn't gone far, that I could turn around and be home in seconds. I couldn't see it anymore. Not because the woods were huge, not because I'd walked for miles. I had barely gone in, but the branches and trunks had already taken the view, layered over each other like a curtain. It was the first time I felt that small shift inside me, the one that said very softly, "You are somewhere else now." And with my loyalty thrown into the hands of the wind, I put my hands on the ladder. The wood under my palms felt strange. Not slimy, not wet, just familiar in a way it shouldn't have been. Like I had held it before, like my hands knew where to go. I climbed, each step held steady without protest. The ladder didn't creak. It should have. That didn't register as wrong yet, not fully, but I noticed it anyway. The way you notice something doesn't quite match what your brain expects. I never once thought about my father's punishment. That's another detail that bothers me now. The fear of him should have been the loudest thing in my head. Instead, my thoughts were calm and simple. A small voice in me, my own voice, the one that always tried to smooth things over, told me it would be worth it, like there was a reward waiting at the top. At the top, the treehouse came into view. It sat between branches that bent around it without breaking. A small platform with walls made of mismatched boards nailed together at different times by different hands, or maybe the same hand returning without remembering the last time. The roof slanted slightly to one side. Not enough to make it feel like it was about to fall, just enough to make it feel careless, like whoever built it hadn't cared if it looked straight. There was an opening where a window should have been, but nothing framed it, just air held in place by wood. Inside, someone was already there. A boy sat against the far wall. He wasn't doing anything. He was just sitting as if sitting was the point, as if the act itself mattered more than any activity. He looked up when I reached the top. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look curious either. He looked at me the way you look at a clock when it reaches the exact time you expected, like I had arrived at the correct moment. No earlier, no later. I stood at the opening for a second before stepping in. My hand rested on the frame longer than it needed to. The boards under my fingers felt dry and rough, but again, not unfamiliar. The floorboards were worn in a way that didn't match the size of the space. The center boards had softened under repeated weight, like too many feet had stood in the same spot over and over. But nothing about this place suggested it should have had that kind of repetition. It didn't feel like a place kids visited every day. It felt like a place that didn't allow every day to exist the same way. The air inside was different from the woods. Not warmer, not safer, just separated, like it didn't belong to the same rules as everything outside. "You found it," the boy said. His voice was flat, not friendly, not guarded. It was the kind of voice that didn't change depending on who was listening. "I didn't know it was here," I said. He nodded once. "It has always been here," he said. I asked if it belonged to him. He looked at the floor before answering, like he needed to check something there. "No," he said. "It doesn't belong to anything." I sat down across from him. The wood beneath me didn't creak. It should have. That was the first thing I noticed that felt clearly wrong, even though I couldn't explain why it mattered. In a treehouse, everything creaks. That's part of the comfort of it. That's how you know you're in something real, something that responds when you move. Outside, branches shifted slightly. Inside, nothing changed in response. The air didn't even seem to stir. Time didn't feel absent. It felt unnecessary, like we could sit there forever and nothing would demand we leave. I asked him his name. He hesitated, not like he was shy, but like the question forced him to reach for something that didn't stay in the same place. "Owen," he said finally. I told him my name. He repeated it once, quietly, under his breath, like he was testing the sound of it. Then he looked up again. "You shouldn't stay long the first time," he said. "Why?" I asked. His attention shifted past me, toward the opening, toward the place where the ladder met the ground. "Because you'll come back," he said. I didn't understand what he meant, and I think that's the part I remember most clearly. Not the boards, not the smell of the woods, not even Owen's face. Just the strong, uncomfortable certainty that there was something I didn't understand yet, and that I wouldn't be able to avoid understanding it later. When I left, the climb down felt shorter than it should have. I don't remember each step. I only remember being at the top, turning toward the ladder, and then suddenly being on the ground again, like the middle part had been cut out of the experience. That should have terrified me, but it didn't. It just left me with a hollow feeling, like a missing page in a book. The woods looked the same on the way out. They always do. Still, patient. But something in them had started to feel familiar, and not in a comforting way. In a way that didn't make sense. Like I had been there longer than I should have been able to be. Like the woods were already learning me. And like I would go back before I even decided to. The next time I went, I wasn't thinking about going. I left the house after my father had gone back to sleep. Or at least I assumed he was asleep. In our house, silence didn't always mean rest. Sometimes it meant waiting. The kind of waiting that could turn into anger if you disturbed it. The air outside was cooler than it had been before. It was the kind of morning that made everything look slightly unfinished, like the day hadn't fully loaded yet. I didn't hesitate at the edge of the yard. I should have. The fact that I didn't should have told me something. But at the time, it just felt normal, like I was walking toward something I had already promised myself. The woods took me in the same way they had the first time. Not welcoming, not resisting, just allowing, like a door opening because it had been told to. The ladder was already there. I remember noticing that I wasn't surprised anymore. That should have scared me. Instead, it felt like confirmation. Like, yes, of course it's here. I climbed. At the top, the treehouse waited in the same shape as before, same uneven boards, same quiet opening where a window should have been. Owen was inside. He looked up when I stepped in, but not like he'd been waiting for me specifically. More like he'd known I would arrive eventually, the way you know the sun will come up without knowing the exact second. "You're earlier today," he said. I sat down without answering right away. The floor felt the same under me, but this time I noticed a darker mark along one of the boards near the wall. Not big, not shaped like anything, just a dark stain in the grain, like something had pressed there and left itself behind. I pointed at it. "What is that?" I asked. Owen looked at it for a moment. "Nothing," he said. But he didn't look at me when he said it. His eyes stayed on the mark like he was watching it to make sure it didn't change. I asked him how long he'd been there. He shrugged. "I don't know." I told him it felt like I'd been gone longer this time. He nodded once, like he'd been expecting me to say that. "It stretches?" he said. "What stretches?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood and walked toward the opening where the ladder began. He stopped there, half turned away, looking out into the trees with an expression that didn't belong on a kid's face. It wasn't wonder. It wasn't fear. It was the look of someone who has learned to watch for something. "You should go home before it gets noticed," he said. I remember that word clearly. Not before it gets late. Not before you get in trouble. Before it gets noticed. "Who would notice?" I asked. Owen didn't answer. When I climbed down, everything seemed normal for the first few seconds. The woods were still. The light filtered through leaves the way it always did. My shoes pressed into the soft ground and made the same quiet sounds. Then, halfway home, I stopped walking. There was mud on my sleeve. I didn't remember falling. I didn't remember brushing against anything wet. I held my arm out and stared at the stain, trying to force a memory into place. I looked at my hands. There was dirt under my fingernails. Not fresh dirt. Pressed-in dirt, old enough to have dried and settled like it had been there for hours. I stood there for a long time, trying to remember how it got there. I couldn't. When I got home, my father was already awake. He didn't say anything when I came in. He didn't ask where I'd been. He just looked at me for a moment longer than usual, then went back to what he was doing, like he'd decided that speaking would make something worse. But I noticed something different. He was quieter than normal, and not just in the way he always was. His silence felt measured, careful, like he was listening for something inside the house, Later, when I changed my shirt, I saw the mark on my arm, a bruise. Not new enough to be red, not old enough to be fading. It sat there in that in-between stage that proved it had happened recently, but not recently enough to match the last hour. I stood in front of the mirror staring at it until my eyes went dry. I tried to remember when it had happened. I couldn't. That night I didn't sleep properly. I kept thinking about Owen standing at the edge of the treehouse, not looking at me when he spoke, before it gets noticed. I didn't know what he meant, but I was starting to understand something worse. There were things in the woods that didn't stay in the woods, and I had started carrying them back without remembering doing it. I stayed away for a few days after that, but not because I made a strong decision. It was more like the house itself had changed shape around me, not in any obvious way, just in a watched way, like the walls had learned to pay attention. My father spoke less. When he did speak, it was short and controlled, like every word had to be selected carefully before it left his mouth. I started noticing things I hadn't noticed before, or maybe I'd noticed them and never let myself name them. How he looked at me longer than he used to. How he stopped asking where I'd been, even when I'd been gone for hours. How he checked the doors at night, not once, but twice. None of it was talked about. None of it was explained. The house didn't need to explain itself. It just existed, heavy with unspoken rules. And I stayed away from the woods while it did. But the woods didn't feel like something I'd left behind. They sat in the back of my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. The image of the ladder kept showing up when I closed my eyes. The smell of damp bark seemed to cling to my clothes even after I washed them. On the fourth day, I went back. The ladder was where it had always been. That part didn't feel strange anymore, and that was its own kind of warning. When something stops feeling strange, it's because you're getting used to it, not because it's safe. I climbed. Owen was already inside. He looked thinner than I remembered. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed it without knowing why my brain latched onto it. Like his outline had been pulled slightly tighter around his bones. "You stayed away longer," he said. I sat down slowly. "I didn't mean to," I said, and it was half a lie and half the truth. I hadn't meant to stay away, but I also hadn't meant to come back. My intentions didn't feel like they mattered much anymore. Owen nodded like it wasn't important. "It still happens," he said. "What still happens?" I asked. He didn't answer. He looked at my hands. For a moment, I thought he was staring at the dirt that always seemed to find its way under my nails now, no matter how clean I was when I left the house. Then I realized he wasn't looking at the dirt. He was looking past it, like he was checking for something underneath the surface. "You brought it back again," he said quietly. "I don't know what you mean," I told him. He waited, then said it lower, like he didn't want the walls to hear. "Your house feels it." I didn't like the way he said that. Not because it sounded threatening, because it sounded like a fact that didn't require my belief. "I didn't do anything," I said. I'm just here." Owen finally looked at me directly. "That's not how it works," he said. The air inside the treehouse felt different again. Not quieter. More held, like something was pressing on it from all sides to keep it still. I asked him what it was. He hesitated for a long time, long enough that I started noticing details I'd ignored before. How the wood beneath us didn't shift when we moved. How the structure didn't settle. How nothing in here responded the way wood should respond to bodies. Then Owen said, "It knows when you go back and forth too many times." "Who is it?" I asked again. He shook his head slightly. "I don't know." But this time it didn't feel like he lacked knowledge. It felt like he didn't want to put the word in the air. Outside, the trees moved. Inside, nothing moved with them. I suddenly needed air, or distance, or anything that felt like I was making choices again. I stood up. Owen stayed seated. "You should go before you forget where you came from again," he said. I stopped at the opening and looked back. For the first time, he didn't look like he was waiting for me. He looked like he was measuring how long I had already been gone, as if he could see time clinging to me like spider webs. On the way down, the ladder felt longer. Not physically, not in a way you could measure. It felt longer in time, like each step took more effort to complete, like the space between the rungs had been stretched in some invisible direction. Halfway down, I paused without knowing why. Something in my hand felt off. I looked down and saw a small splinter buried under my skin. Fresh and bright, a sharp sting that should have made me remember exactly when it happened. I didn't. When I got home, my father was sitting at the table. He didn't look up when I entered. There was a glass in front of him, half empty. He spoke without turning his head. "You were gone longer than yesterday." I hadn't told him I'd left. He looked at me then, and he wasn't angry. That scared me more than anger would have. The next day, I didn't go. I stayed in my room and listened to the house wake up in pieces. Floorboards shifting, pipes moving water through the walls. The small, tired sounds of a place that had been standing too long without being repaired. My father left early without telling me where. He rarely did. But when he was gone, the house felt less like something that held me and more like something that simply hadn't released me yet. I kept my window closed. I told myself I wasn't going back. That lasted until the afternoon, when I realized I was already standing in the woods. I don't remember leaving the house. I don't remember walking through the yard. I just remember blinking and finding myself under the trees. The light broken above me, the air damp and metallic. The ladder was there, waiting in the same place as before. I climbed without hesitation now. That was worse than hesitation would have been. Hesitation would have meant I still had a choice. Owen wasn't sitting where he usually sat. For a moment I thought he wasn't there at all, and I felt a quick, sharp panic. Because if the only other person here was gone, then whatever else was here would have no witness. Then I saw him in the corner, closer to the wall than before, knees drawn up tighter. He looked up when I entered. "You didn't come yesterday," he said. I sat down slowly. I didn't mean to come today, either. Owen nodded once. "That's what it does," he said. "What does?" I asked. He stared at me for a long time, then took a deep breath that sounded wrong in the small space. Not sick, exactly. More like he'd forgotten how to breathe for a second and had to remind himself. "It starts deciding for you," he said. "I don't feel like anything's deciding for me," I said quickly. He looked at me, and there was something tight in his face. Not fear, not surprise. Tension. "You're not paying attention to what you're bringing back," he said. I looked down at my hands. They looked normal. But I didn't trust normal anymore. "What am I bringing back?" I asked. Owen shook his head slightly. "It's not just dirt," he said. I waited for an explanation. He didn't give one. Instead, he stood and moved toward the opening, staring out into the woods like he was trying to see something that wasn't supposed to be visible from this angle. "It's getting harder for you to leave," he said. "That's not true," I said, too fast again. He noticed. He always noticed the things I tried to cover. "You think it stops when you go home," he said. I didn't answer because I didn't know how to answer without admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. Then a sound came from below. Not loud, not clear. Just something moving through the woods in a way that didn't match the wind or an animal. It wasn't a footstep exactly. It was the sound of something shifting its weight with purpose. Owen went still, not reacting, listening. "What is that?" I whispered. He didn't answer. The sound came again. Closer, or maybe just more certain, as if it had decided it didn't need to hide its path. Owen spoke without looking at me. "You shouldn't be here when it gets like this." I stood up too quickly. "I'm leaving." But as I stepped toward the ladder, he said something quieter. Not to me exactly, more to the space between us. "If you go back now," he said, "you'll remember something you didn't before." I stopped at the opening. "What will I remember?" I asked. He didn't answer. I climbed down anyway. The ladder felt colder than before, like it had been sitting in shadow for hours even though the day hadn't changed. When I reached the ground, The woods weren't the same. The trees looked the same. But the feeling was different, like the space between the trunks had gotten narrower, like the air had learned where I was going and was closing in gently to guide me. Halfway home, I stopped again because I felt something in my pocket. I pulled it out, a small piece of wood. Not from my house, not from anything I recognized. It looked like it had been snapped off a board. On it, faint but real, was a mark pressed into the grain. Not carved, pressed, as if something had pushed a shape into it with steady force. I didn't know why it was in my pocket. I didn't remember putting it there. When I got home, my father was standing in the hallway like he'd been waiting. But not for me exactly, more like he was waiting for whatever came with me. He stared at my face for a long time. "Where did you go?" he asked, "before you came back this time?" It wasn't a question. It was the kind of sentence that already had an answer and was only being spoken to see if I would lie. And I realized then that whatever the treehouse was, it wasn't something I was only visiting anymore. It was something that was starting to arrive with me. That night I didn't sleep well. I set the piece of wood on my desk, and I kept looking at it like it might change when I wasn't paying attention. It was small and ordinary, the kind of thing you'd sweep into the trash without thinking, but it felt heavy with meaning I couldn't read. In the morning, my father was already awake when I came out, sitting at the table, the same glass in front of him as before. I couldn't tell if it had been refilled or left untouched. The liquid inside looked clear enough, but when the light hit it, I swore I saw a warm red shimmer in it, like a mirage you'd see over hot pavement. It made no sense, and still I stood there staring too long, my forehead tingling with a damp warmth as if the air itself had leaned in close. I didn't go to the woods that day. I told myself that was a choice. It didn't feel like one. By afternoon, I found myself at the edge of the yard again, standing still and staring into the trees. I remember thinking, I'm not going in. I remember believing it. Then I looked up, and the ladder was already there. I didn't question it anymore. The part of me that argued had gone quiet. I climbed. The treehouse was quiet when I reached it. Owen was sitting near the far wall again, but not the way he usually sat. His head was on the floor, and his body lay beside it at a wrong angle, like someone had dropped him there and he hadn't bothered to fix himself. Looking back, I don't understand how I managed not to scream or run. He was breathing. He was alive. That somehow made it worse because it meant whatever had happened wasn't the kind of thing that killed you. It was the kind of thing you stayed through. He didn't look at me right away. When he did, there was something in his face that stopped me from stepping fully inside. Avoidance. "You're late," he said. I sat down slowly. I didn't think I was coming. "They notice when you don't come back the same," he said. "I don't know what that means," I told him. He finally looked at me, really looked, and there was something steadier in him than before. Not comfort, not trust, endurance, like he'd been carrying this longer than I understood. "You will," he said. Then he stood up fast, like he'd heard something. "Go," he said. "Why?" I asked. He didn't answer. Outside, the sound shifted again. Not closer, not farther. Just turned, like a presence had changed direction without moving. Owen kept his eyes away from me when he spoke again. "Before you leave," he said quietly, "don't look back this time." I climbed down and started home. Halfway there, I stopped. I almost looked back. I don't know what stopped me. Maybe it was his voice. Maybe it was the fear of remembering what he'd promised I would remember. When I reached the house, my father wasn't there, but the front door was open. Not wide, just cracked enough to suggest someone had left in a hurry. Inside, the chair at the table had been shoved back too far. On the floor beneath it was a smear of dirt mixed with that same warm red shimmer I'd thought I saw in the glass earlier, like mud stirred with something that didn't belong in a kitchen. I stood there for a long time without moving, not understanding, just realizing that whatever Owen meant by "they notice," it was no longer something that stayed in the woods. And neither did I. My father didn't come home that night. It should have meant something. It did, but not in the way I expected. The house stayed the same without him. That was the strangest part. It didn't feel emptier or quieter. It felt uncorrected, like a mistake left on a page. I didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. And if I'm being honest, I didn't care the way I probably should have. I couldn't bring myself to care whether he'd left me or died. He'd never felt like the kind of person who could disappear in a way that mattered to anyone but himself. Morning came and it didn't change how I felt. When I checked the front door, it was slightly open again. I closed it. I stood there for a long time after, hand still on the knob as if I expected it to open by itself the moment I let go. Then I found myself walking without deciding to. The woods waited the same way they always had. Not closer, not farther. Just available like a thought you can't stop thinking once you've had it. The ladder was there. I climbed. Owen was already inside. This time his skin was blue, an impossible movie blue color that didn't belong on a living person. It made me think stupidly of those tall blue characters from that long movie my father said I wasn't allowed to watch. I'd snuck around and watched part of it anyway once. That night had been long and painful, and I hadn't cared. The memory hit me now with a weird bitterness because my brain was trying to treat what I was seeing like something fake, like a reference, like a joke. Owen looked at me. "You shouldn't have come," he said. I stopped at the opening. I didn't decide to. He nodded once. I know. I stepped in slowly. Near him on the floor, I noticed a small split in one of the boards, darkened around the edges. It wasn't old damage. It looked recent, like something had hit it hard enough to crack the wood. I pointed at it. What happened here? Nothing that matters. That was the first time I realized he'd started answering without answering, like the truth had become too dangerous to say plainly. He moved toward the ladder, then stopped halfway, as if he'd forgotten what he was doing. He stood there with his shoulders slightly hunched, listening. I stayed quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had been building in me for days. "Owen," I said, "what is so bad about it?" He didn't answer, so I kept going, because the words felt like they weren't fully mine anymore. "I don't feel like I'm in danger here," I said. "It doesn't feel like danger. It feels better than home." Owen flinched, not at the words exactly, but at the certainty behind them, like I'd repeated something he'd heard before. I kept talking, unable to stop. "I'm safe here," I said. "Nothing hurts here. Nothing bad is waiting for me here." Then, quieter, more honest than I wanted to be, "I think this is the only place I've ever been that feels like it wants me to stay." For a moment, he didn't speak at all. When he finally did, his voice was lower. "That's why it works," he said. I didn't understand, but I didn't feel afraid when he said it. That was another warning I didn't know how to read. The fact that I should have been scared, and I wasn't. Owen stepped back from the opening suddenly, like something had reached the edge of the ladder. Then I heard movement, soft and quick, wood creaking in a way it hadn't creaked for me. A small, disheveled boy pulled himself up onto the platform, and without meaning to, without deciding to, I spoke in a voice that sounded like mine and didn't. "You found it," I said. The boy stared at me. "I didn't know it was here," he said. I nodded once, the motion familiar, rehearsed. "It has always been here," I said. He asked if it belonged to me. I looked at the floor for a moment before answering. The same pause Owen had done the first day, like the pause was part of the script. "No," I said. "It doesn't belong to anything." I turned my head to the left without thinking. Owen was gone, not moved, not hiding, gone in the simple way a thing disappears when it was never as solid as you believed. The boy looked at me again. "What's your name?" he asked. I hesitated, not because I didn't know, but because the question made my mind reach for something that didn't stay in one place. "Owen," I said. The boy repeated it softly, testing the sound of it under his breath, the same way Owen had tested my name. Then he said, "You shouldn't stay long the first time." Why? The boy asked, his face tilted up with a cautious seriousness I recognized too well. I heard myself answer calm and level, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because you'll come back. And in that moment, sitting in that treehouse that didn't creak, surrounded by woods that didn't feel like they belonged to my world anymore, I understood what Owen had been trying not to say. It wasn't just that the woods didn't let you leave cleanly. It was that the treehouse didn't just stretch time. It stretched people. It sent you back and forth until the roles swapped, until you answered the same questions with the same voice, until you stopped being the one who arrived and started being the one who waited. And somewhere below us, in the stillness between the trees, something shifted again, closer this time, not rushing, not hunting, just noticing that the story was continuing exactly the way it liked. Story 4. It was the summer of 2016 when my parents sent me away to stay with my grandmother in her province. My mom was angry with me. For the past few days, I'd been getting myself into trouble nonstop, like I had some switch flipped inside me and couldn't turn it back off. I didn't even fully understand why I was acting the way I was. I was 16, and already I knew how to smoke. Sometimes I'd get intoxicated, too. Not every day, not enough for anyone to call it an addiction, but enough that my mom watched me with this constant disappointment that felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. She kept telling me it wasn't proper for a girl to behave like that. She said it like it was a simple choice, like all I had to do was decide to be different, and I would be. But I didn't think it was that simple. I still don't. And even now, after all these years, I can't stop myself from thinking the same ugly thought. They did this to me. They built the loneliness inside me, and then they punished me for trying to fill it. My parents were separated. They both had their own new, happy families, the kind you see in photos where everyone is smiling like they're supposed to. And then there was me, the leftover piece, the mistake, the burden, the kid who didn't fit anywhere. I never said those words out loud back then, but I felt them in the way they looked at me when I walked into a room, like I was something they had to deal with, not someone they wanted. All I ever wanted was their attention. Real attention, not lectures and rules and annoyed sighs. Love. The kind I'd been starving for since I was little. So I acted out. I pushed. I broke rules. I made noise. Because when I was good, they forgot I existed. When I was bad, at least they had to look at me. Eventually, they'd had enough. Sending me to my grandmother wasn't framed as punishment. But that's what it was. They told me I needed a change of environment. They told me my grandmother could use the company. They told me it would be good for me. Really, it was a break from me. Time off. A way to shove me somewhere safe and quiet so they could breathe again. My grandmother was older, but she was still strong. She wasn't sick. She wasn't fragile. And she didn't act like I was a problem she had to manage. When I called to tell her I was coming, she sounded pleased, like she actually wanted me there. After a long flight, I landed at the airport and saw my aunts waiting. They were from my mom's side. Family I didn't see much, but I recognized them right away. Aunt Jess hugged me tight, like she didn't care if I wanted space or not. Aunt Leah smiled and took my bag like it was nothing. My grandmother lived in a slightly remote area, so getting there was a whole trip on its own. We took a bus and rode for another 4 hours. The road changed as we went. Less traffic, fewer buildings, more open space. The air looked different through the window, cleaner somehow, and the sky felt bigger. By the time we reached my grandmother's place, I was exhausted. But when I stepped inside her house, something in me loosened. Her house was big, at least compared to where I'd been living. To me, it was perfect. It was quiet in a way the city never was. You could actually hear the wind through trees. You could hear insects. At night, the darkness felt real, not polluted by streetlights. Everything was going smoothly at first. I expected boredom because that's what adults always say about places like that. But it turned out better than I'd imagined. My grandmother had a way of making simple things feel special. Breakfast wasn't just breakfast. It was a whole event. She'd tell stories while she cooked. She'd ask me questions about school and actually listen to the answers. She'd laugh at my jokes, even the stupid ones. For the first time in a long time, I felt included, like I wasn't fighting for space in someone's life. One morning, Aunt Jess suggested we go camping. She said it casually, like it was nothing, like it was something families did all the time. I got excited immediately because I'd never gone camping before. My life had been malls, streets, apartments, city noise. The idea of sleeping somewhere surrounded by trees felt like stepping into a movie. Jess told us there was a small cabin near the campsite, so we wouldn't need to bring a tent. That made it feel safer to me, less like I'd be exposed to the dark with nothing between me and whatever lived in the woods. I agreed right away and started packing. After a while, Aunt Leah showed up with her fiancé, Uncle Roni. I called him Uncle because that's what everyone did, even though they weren't married yet. He was friendly and a little loud, the type who tries to keep energy up even when nobody asked. They helped us prepare, and after some quick back and forth, they decided to join us too. We drove to the campsite in the afternoon. It was about a 45-minute trip from my grandmother's house. The road got narrower the further we went, and the trees pressed closer, turning the world into shades of green and brown. When we arrived, I helped Aunt Jess carry the food while the others unloaded supplies. I could smell smoke from other campsites somewhere nearby, and the air had that earthy scent that makes you feel like you're far from everything. We saw a local walking along the edge of the area and asked him for directions to the cabin. He pointed without saying much, just a quick gesture into the trees like it was obvious. We followed the path until the cabin came into view. It looked worn down. Old wood, faded and rough, parts of it sagged slightly like it had been standing too long without anyone caring. It wasn't the cozy little cabin I'd pictured. It looked like it needed repairs it wasn't going to get. Still, it was shelter. We went inside and started setting up for the afternoon. Once we were busy, it got easier to ignore the cabin's condition. We made the place feel lived in for the day. We cooked. My grandmother sat like a queen in the middle of it all, telling stories about her childhood. My aunts teased her. She teased them back. Uncle Roni tried to act like he knew wilderness skills, and everyone laughed at him. I remember thinking very clearly that I had never felt so happy. That's what makes the rest of it feel even crueler, like something waited until I finally relaxed before it struck. When night fell, we decided to get some rest. We spread blankets out, picked spots, talked quietly until the last bits of conversation turned into sleepy silence. I don't know how long I slept, but I do know it was around 1 a.m. when Aunt Leah shook me awake. Her face was tight with worry. Not panicked, but serious in a way that made my stomach clench before she even spoke. She told me my grandmother wasn't feeling well. She said they needed to take her to the hospital. I sat up fast, confused, still half asleep. What happened? I don't know, she said. She just started feeling worse. We can't wait. Where's Aunt Jess? I asked, because the cabin felt wrong without her voice. She went out earlier to buy medicine, Leah said, glancing toward the door like she wished Jess would walk in right then. But I don't think your grandmother can wait. We're taking her to the hospital now. Stay here and wait for your Aunt Jess. Before I could argue, before I could even fully wake up, they were already moving. Aunt Leah and Uncle Roni helped my grandmother out the door. I heard their footsteps on the porch. I heard the car start. Then the engine faded away into the night. Leah closed the cabin door behind her, and I was alone. The cabin felt colder immediately, not just physically. The kind of cold that comes from realizing there's no one between you and the dark outside. I tried to stay awake, but the exhaustion pulled me down. I must have fallen asleep again because the next thing I remember is waking up to a sound that didn't belong in a dream. Someone knocking on the door. I sat up, heart racing, and for a second I felt relief. Aunt Jess, I thought, maybe she finally came back. I rushed to the door and opened it. There was nobody there, just darkness, trees, cold air pushing into the cabin. a breeze that smelled like damp wood and dirt. I stood in the doorway for a few seconds, staring into the night, trying to make my eyes adjust. Nothing moved. No flashlight beam, no car lights, no shape of a person on the path. My throat tightened. I closed the door slowly and backed away. What was that? I told myself it had to be a prank. Local kids, maybe. Someone messing around because they saw a group come into the cabin earlier and thought it would be funny to scare them. It was a comforting explanation because it was normal, and normal was the only thing I could hold on to. Before I could even make it back to where I'd been sleeping, I heard another knock. This time it sounded heavier. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound angry instead of terrified. No answer, just silence. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt like something listening. Fear hit me hard, and my hands started shaking. I hated that my body betrayed me like that, but I couldn't control it. My heart felt like it was trying to climb out of my chest. Then another knock came. My voice came out thin and trembling. "Aunt Jess." No response. I backed into a corner of the cabin, pressing myself against the wall like it could protect me. I couldn't stop shaking. I tried to breathe slowly, but every breath felt like it caught in my throat. The knocking got louder, more aggressive, like whoever was outside had gotten impatient. I cried out without meaning to. I shouted again and again, hoping someone at another campsite would hear, hoping someone would come running, hoping the sound of my voice would scare whoever was doing it. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. The silence felt heavy, wrong, like the air had thickened. I stayed in the corner, eyes locked on the door, waiting for it to burst open, waiting for footsteps, waiting for laughter. Nothing happened. My mind started spiraling, trying to fill the quiet with explanations. Maybe they left. Maybe they got bored. Maybe it really was just kids. Then I heard it again. A knock. But it wasn't the door. It came from inside the cabin, from below, and with it came a slow creak, like wood bending under weight. "Oh my God," I whispered, because the sound wasn't coming from the door anymore. It was coming from the floor. My eyes dropped to the wooden floorboards. The cabin was old, and the boards weren't perfectly fitted. There were tiny gaps between planks here and there, the kind of cracks you don't notice in daylight because they're just part of an old place. The creak came again, closer, like something shifting under the floor. I should have stayed where I was. I should have done anything except what I did next. But fear and curiosity get tangled together when you're young, and I was too scared to think straight. I forced myself to move toward the sound, step by step, like my body was doing it against my will. There was a small crack between two planks near the center of the room, and I swear there was something beneath it. I crouched slowly, my knees shaking. I bent down and tried to look through the gap. At first I couldn't see anything except darkness, just shadow packed tight under the boards. So I leaned closer, closer, and then I saw eyes. Cold eyes, wide open, staring straight back at me from below the floor. For a second, my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. It felt like looking into a photograph that shouldn't exist. Like my mind was trying to blur it out for my own safety. Then the reality punched through. Someone was under the cabin, not hiding in the woods, not knocking as a prank. Under the floor, my entire body went numb. I couldn't even scream right away. My mouth opened, and nothing came out. I jerked backward and forced myself up, stumbling. I ran for the door, yanked it open, desperate to get outside, desperate to put distance between me and whatever was under the boards. And there was someone standing directly in front of me, so close I almost slammed into them. I didn't even get time to see their face clearly. Everything went black. People ask me what happened next. They ask how I got home. They ask what I remember. They ask why I didn't call the police immediately, why I didn't tell my parents, why I didn't tell anyone everything. It's been 10 years, and I still don't know how to explain it in a way that won't make people look at me like I'm lying or crazy. I remember waking up later, not in the cabin. I remember light that hurt my eyes. I remember voices that sounded far away, like I was underwater. I remember the taste of metal in my mouth and the feeling of dirt under my nails. But the clearest memory is the one I wish I didn't have. There was a dead body under the floor, and I know who it was. It was Aunt Jess. I didn't understand it at first. My brain tried to reject it the way it rejects any impossible thing. How could Jess be under the floor when Leah said she went to buy medicine? How could she be there when I'd been awake and waiting for her to come back through the door? But I saw her. Those eyes weren't just eyes. They belonged to someone I knew, someone who had hugged me at the airport, someone who had made me feel like I mattered. And after that night, nothing in my family felt real again. I tried, in the years that followed, to talk to my parents about what happened. I'd start the conversation in my head 1,000 times. I'd imagine their faces, their questions, their disbelief. I'd imagine my mom blaming me somehow. I'd imagine my dad shutting down, refusing to hear it, because it was easier to pretend nothing ever happened. And the worst part is that I couldn't even prove it. The cabin was old, the floor was thick. Even if I could find it again, and I'm not sure I could, what would I do? Tear up boards? Convince someone to help me break through rotten wood based on a story I can barely say out loud? Sometimes I still think about that crack between the planks, about the way the silence felt right before the sound moved from the door to the floor, about the eyes staring back at me like they'd been waiting for me to look. And sometimes I think about how close I came to telling the truth in that moment. How if I'd had a flashlight, if I'd had a phone, if I'd had one adult with me, maybe it would have ended differently. But I was alone, 16, angry, desperate for love, sent away like a problem that needed storing. And I can't stop thinking that if my parents hadn't pushed me out of their lives so easily, I never would have been in that cabin at all. I still don't know what was standing in front of the door when I threw it open. I don't know who knocked or why. I don't know how Jess ended up under the floor or how long she'd been there. All I know is that when my life split into before and after, it happened in that cabin on that night, when the knocking moved from the door to the floor, and I leaned down and looked through the crack. Oh, how unfortunate. If only I could break through that wooden floor. Then maybe I could finally tell them without anyone having the choice to doubt me. Story 5. Before fire, there was listening. We came to rest inside a mountain, not the kind you'd point to on a postcard or see named on a map, not a dramatic peak with a clean outline. This one was older than the idea of being named. It had been buried under sediment and lifted back up and buried again, so many times it had lost any clear memory of the sky. Even now, if you stood on its surface, you might not realize you were on a mountain at all. It was just ground, just rock, just a quiet place where the wind didn't seem to carry as far. We chose it because it was quiet. We chose it because the stone was dense with iron. Iron holds vibration in a particular way. Iron carries. Iron remembers. The iron in this mountain sang at a frequency we could fold ourselves into, the way you might fold a paper letter and slide it into an envelope. We weren't hiding exactly. We were waiting. There's a difference. Although after hundreds of millions of years, the difference starts to feel like a word game. Waiting implies purpose. Hiding implies fear. We came here because this planet was loud in the right way, because it held patterns, because it carried signal even before any creature on its surface could shape a thought. At the time, there were 2 of us. I will call the other one Myrrh, because that's the closest my translated memory can get to what Myrrh felt like when we touched across the deep rock. A pressure, a warmth, the feeling of deep water sealed inside stone. Myrrh arrived long after I did, something like 40,000 years later, and settled into a fault line far to the north. We had no mouths. We didn't speak in air. We spoke through tremors, through tiny shifts in the crust, through long vibrations that traveled slowly through granite and basalt. A single sentence could take years to send, sometimes decades, if the rock between us was stubborn. The first thing Myrrh said, when the connection finally formed, was simple. Something is moving up there. I had already noticed. They came on two legs. That alone wasn't unusual. Life on this planet had tried walking upright before, but those earlier creatures never developed the habit of looking up. These new ones did. That was the first sign that they were different. Prey animals look up with fear. They look up to check for danger. These looked up with something else. They stared into the sky as if it mattered, as if it held answers. They pointed. They made sounds to each other. They stood on hillsides at night and tracked lights moving across the dark. And they didn't run. We observed them for a very long time, trying to categorize what we were seeing. Our instruments, if you can call our senses instruments, had names for hunger, threat, reproduction, territory. We did not have a name for what those humans were doing when they watched the stars. We watched them do it again and again, across generations. Myrrh was the one who finally found the closest word, wonder. Yes, that was it. They looked up with wonder, and that wonder changed the way they moved through the world. It pushed them into open spaces. It made them gather in groups not only for safety, but for shared attention. It made them create stories they could carry from one night to the next. Over time, their sounds began to repeat in patterns. The patterns were taught to children. The children grew and taught them onward. The sounds became a kind of signal between minds. The signal thickened and stabilized until it became what they would eventually call language. Myrrh and I recognized language the moment it fully formed, because language is what we are closest to, even when we don't use mouths. Language is pattern. Pattern is signal. Signal is, in a sense, speech. For the first time since we arrived on this world, we felt less alone. We had found something like our people. We watched them build fire, not discover it, build it. They discovered it the way every creature eventually stumbles into fire: lightning, sparks, friction. But humans did something different afterward. They kept it. They protected it. They fed it through the night. They argued about it. They assigned responsibility to it. They chose a person to carry it from one place to another as if it was precious, as if it had value beyond warmth. That was not instinct. That was culture beginning. Myrrh spent 300 years composing a message about this. By the time the vibration reached me through the rock, the particular group of humans who had first shown us fire had been dead for many, many generations. That was the problem with our communication. By the time one of us spoke and the other replied, entire languages could rise and vanish on the surface. I spent another century shaping my response. When it finally arrived at Myrrh, it was only 2 words. I know. We were not fast, but we were patient. Time did not move for us the way it moves for things with heartbeats. We did not measure it in days or seasons. We felt it the way a river feels time as it moves through limestone. Slowly, continuously, shaping the world without needing to hurry. 10,000 years passed like a pleasant stretch of weather, unremarkable except for the changes it left behind. We were not bored. We were witnesses. We watched humans bury their dead. We watched them place objects beside bodies, offerings for a place they could not see. We watched them paint cave walls with animals that would one day disappear. Sometimes the paintings were of creatures they had known only through the memories of their oldest members, already turning real life into myth. We watched their stories grow teeth and wings. We watched them begin to believe in things beyond what their eyes could prove. They developed gods before they developed writing. That made sense. Gods explained the signals they could feel but could not name. The tremor in stone before an earthquake. The pressure change before a storm. The low, steady hum that sometimes appeared at dusk in certain valleys and made people stop talking without knowing why. They were feeling us. They didn't understand it as us. They understood it as presence, as sacredness, as warning, as blessing. They built temples where the vibration was strongest. They marked those places. They returned to them. They called them holy. They were right, in a way, even if their reasons were different from reality. We had not meant to become sacred. It happened anyway. Agriculture arrived like a shock. Not a bad shock. A shock the way a sudden understanding can shake you. The way the whole room seems to tilt when you realize something that was in front of you the entire time. One day, by our measure, humans were following animals across land. Then, in what felt like a short span, they stopped moving. They settled. They decided staying was possible. They learned how to make the ground produce what they needed, and that required attention and patience and memory. They watched soil. They watched rain. They watched seasons. They made plans that reached beyond a single day's hunger. When agriculture spread, Mur's tremors carried something close to excitement. I felt Mur's fault line shift in ways it hadn't in centuries. We learned early that our reactions had consequences. When we first arrived, we argued about whether to reveal ourselves, and our arguing caused earthquakes. Small ones, but enough to frighten the surface. It taught us caution. We learned to remain still when discussing anything important. We did not reveal ourselves. We had reasons. Humans were not ready for us. We knew they were not ready because we saw what happened when they met something they weren't prepared to understand. When two large groups of humans met without shared language, without trade relationships, without any bridge of familiarity, the outcome was often violence. It wasn't always hate. It was uncertainty turning into fear, fear turning into defense, and defense looking exactly like aggression from the other side. We were the unknown at the largest scale. So we waited. We did it without judgment. Waiting was our nature. When humans invented writing, we felt it immediately. It was like a sealed door opening somewhere deep inside a house. Writing is signal made permanent. It is communication that survives the death of the sender. It is memory that can be carried across time without needing a living mouth to repeat it. It was, in a way, humans creating something that resembled what we were. Record and pattern stored in matter. We had waited so long for a species to do that. Mur took a very long time to respond, as if even Mur didn't know what to say. When the vibration finally arrived, it carried something I can only translate as awe. That surprised me at first. We were the ancient things inside stone. We were supposed to be the ones worth awe. But Mur was right to feel it. I felt it too. The centuries that followed, between early writing and what humans call modernity, were not quiet, but they had a shape. Wars came like storms, rising, breaking, fading, returning. Cities rose in the same river deltas again and again, no matter who built them, because soil and water and trade routes don't change easily. Human history shifted constantly, but it kept colliding with the same geography. We were the geography. That fact interested us. Religions changed names and symbols, but the core impulse never disappeared. Humans kept pointing at something vast beneath their lives, something old, something present before them, and likely present after, something that breathed at a frequency below human hearing. They wrote myths about underworlds and sleeping giants and voices in the stone. They were not describing us exactly, but they were describing the sensation of us. Mur once sent a thought that took years to arrive, and when it reached me, it was formed like a poem. We are the tuning fork the universe left inside the planet. The religions are humans trying to describe the vibration. It took us centuries to discuss that idea. We agreed it was a good description. The industrial age made us uncomfortable. Not in a moral way. We did not have clean authority to judge a species whose entire lifetime was shorter than one of our slow conversations. Our discomfort was physical. Drilling and mining and blasting shook the crust. Extraction cut into deep seams that had been untouched for ages. Humans began pulling coal and oil out of the ground at a scale that made the planet feel wounded. From our perspective, it was more than fuel. Coal and oil were compressed record. Ancient life, ancient biological memory pressed into material and stored for time. Humans were burning the record. They didn't know the record existed. They couldn't hear what we heard. We could not tell them. We discussed intervention. I will admit that. We argued in tremors and pressure shifts, and the argument itself caused consequences. Minor earthquakes in places that were already unstable. The planet is sensitive. We learned again that even our thoughts, translated into movement, could harm. We did not intervene. We are not that kind of signal. So what are we? This question has been with us since before the first primate stood upright and shaded its eyes against the sun. We are not origin signals. We did not begin here. The place we came from has drifted so far outside what human instruments can reach that it might as well be a myth to them. But it existed. It exists. We think. We are not command signals. We carry no orders. No mission that requires conquest. No agenda written like a plan. As best we can understand ourselves, we are record signals. We watch. We remember. We keep the pattern of what we have witnessed. Our record is very long now. We would not trade it. When humans split the atom, we felt it like a door slamming in a distant room. The first test sent a frequency through the crust that we had not encountered since before we arrived here. It was sharp and wrong. Myrrh went silent for decades after that. That silence was unusual. Myrrh was never silent for that long. During those decades, I listened closely to the new vibration in the planet, trying to understand if it meant the same thing it had meant at the star we came from. Where we came from, that frequency meant one thing: the end. It did not mean the end here. Not yet. Humans stepped close to annihilation and then, strangely, did not choose it. That mattered. A species that can end itself and decides not to is making one of the most important choices it will ever make. We marked it carefully in the record. Then came the satellites. The first one rose into the silence above the atmosphere, and both Myrrh and I registered it at the same moment. A small manufactured object leaving the planet's pull, crossing into a space where nothing living had ever transmitted before. And the satellite did what it was built to do. It transmitted. It made the planet loud. Within decades, the space above the atmosphere filled with human-made noise, radio waves, data, music, voices bouncing across the curve of the world. Signals moved so fast that a human could speak in one place and be heard in another before a heartbeat finished. Myrrh and I had to adjust our listening range. We had to learn their new languages of transmission. We listened to them talk to each other across. We listened to them bounce signals off the surface of the planet itself. We listened as they began to speak outward into the dark between stars, without fully understanding what it means to speak into the dark. They were becoming what we are, not on purpose, not by decision. It happened the way species change, slowly, through repeated behavior, through the pressure of their own nature. They were becoming signals. Myrrh sent me a message faster than any message before. It still took years, but for us, it was urgent. I felt Myrrh's fault line shift as the thought moved through the stone. Do you think they know about us? I thought for a long time before answering. 11 years passed, the way a person might pause before saying something difficult. Some of them do. Myrrh did not respond for a long time. I understood why. I had been thinking about the same thing. Certain humans, rare ones, who stood in particular places where the vibration was stronger and felt it in their bones. People who looked at a hillside and sensed something listening beneath it. People who said quietly to friends and coworkers, "There is something down there, something old, something aware." Those humans were treated the way early feelers often are, with skepticism, with jokes, with the sharp cruelty people use when they're afraid of being asked to consider something too big. Those humans were not wrong. They were early. We remained inside the mountain. The mountain itself changed around us. Glaciers reshaped it, slow violence over ages. Tectonic movement carried the iron around me kilometers from where I first folded into it, moving so slowly that human instruments once declared the stone completely still. Myrrh's fault line opened and closed and opened again. We drifted. We shifted. We did not leave. Humans kept transmitting into space. They sent messages like flares. Is anyone out there? We are here. Here is our music. Here is our math. Here is our location. Here is our invitation. From the weight of our record, from all our watching, we can tell them something with certainty. Their transmissions will reach something. Somewhere in the dark, some old thing will receive the signal. That thing will be patient. It will have been waiting longer than the message took to travel. It will not look like humans. It will not speak at human speed. It will take a very long time to reply. And when the reply comes, humans will not recognize it as a reply. Not at first. They will call it an unexplained signal. They will argue about it. They will divide into camps. Natural phenomenon, instrument error, hoax, possibility. They will build better machines. They will point those machines toward the sky, then eventually toward the ground, because the ground is where old things hide best. They will feel the change before they can measure it. The early feelers will be first again. They will stand in certain valleys, in certain mountains, and they will look up and say, quietly, to the people around them, something is out there. And they will be right. Mur sent me another message not long ago. It took 2 years to arrive, and it held only 3 words. We are ready. I spent a year forming my reply. I understood what Mur meant. Not that we were ready to reveal ourselves openly. That debate has run as long as humans have had writing, and it has never ended. Mur meant something narrower, something practical. Humans at the edge of official science, people who publish outside safe journals, people who listen to frequencies that institutions dismiss as noise, are building better instruments, better ground sensors, better listening arrays. Their machines are beginning to point down. They are getting closer. My reply was simple. Not yet, but soon. We have been inside this mountain for hundreds of millions of years. We watched the first fires built and carried. We watched language harden into writing. We watched atoms split. We watched the planet fill with transmission. We watched humans go from wondering at lights in the sky to becoming lights in the sky. We kept the record. We are patient. We are the kind of signal that knows how to wait. But I will tell you one thing, because you're reading this, and that means I am already speaking to you in the only way I can. I am pushing my pattern into your mind, hoping it lands in a frequency you can hold. The vibration in the rock is real. The feeling you've had in certain quiet valleys, in certain old mountains, in places where the ground seems like it's holding its breath, where the silence doesn't feel empty, but attentive, that feeling is real. You are not imagining it. You are not wrong. You're early. Story 6. My daughter Emma has recently discovered that toy stores exist. This is a problem. Because now every time we go anywhere that even vaguely resembles a place where toys might be sold, she develops an intense emotional connection to something she saw about 5 seconds ago. She can be completely fine one moment, and then she spots a plastic unicorn on a shelf, and suddenly it's like we've stumbled across a long-lost friend she's been searching for her whole life. Most of the time, I can steer her away before things get dramatic. I've learned the techniques. Redirect, distract, offer a snack, point at something shiny, keep walking. It doesn't always work, but it works enough. Last month, though, she found something I couldn't really argue against. It happened at a flea market about 20 minutes outside town. My wife loves those places. She can spend hours digging through old kitchen stuff, antique picture frames, mismatched teacups, and things that somehow cost more because they're older. I've accepted that this is who she is. The same way she's accepted that I can stare at the same shelf in a hardware store for 10 minutes like I'm reading a novel. Emma is 6, which means flea markets usually bore her to death. She starts out excited because it feels like an outing, but after 10 minutes, she realizes there are no rides, no cartoons, and no one is selling cotton candy shaped like a unicorn. After that, she drags her feet behind us like she's being forced through a museum. That morning went the same way. My wife walked slowly past table after table, picking things up, squinting at price tags, asking vendors questions that sounded to me like a foreign language. Emma followed along at first, then started lagging behind, sighing loudly, scuffing her sneakers against the gravel. Eventually, like always, she found something she could hold. We were passing a folding table that had a cardboard box full of plastic dinosaurs and a pile of stuffed animals that looked like they'd survived several generations of children. The stuffed animals were the kind you see in thrift stores sometimes, with fur worn thin in places and that slightly dusty smell that never really comes out. Emma rummaged through them with mild interest. Then her hand stopped. She pulled something out and hugged it to her chest like it had been waiting just for her. It was a Furby. I know people joke about those things being creepy. I've seen the memes and the videos where someone digs one out of a closet 10 years later and it starts whispering in the dark. But I also remember when they first came out. Every kid wanted one. They were everywhere for a while, a whole cultural moment. I'd never owned one myself, but I remembered them as harmless, if a little weird. Emma held it up and squeezed it. The toy made a faint noise, like a broken chirp, and her face lit up. "Daddy, look," she said, laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. The guy running the table didn't look up from his folding chair. He had a baseball cap pulled low and a half-empty coffee cup balanced on his knee. $2, he said, like he was selling a used spoon. Emma turned to me with that hopeful expression kids can summon instantly when they think they're about to hear no. Wide eyes, slight pout, the look that says I am prepared to be devastated. $2 seemed like a small price to keep her happy for the rest of the day. So I handed over the cash, and Emma clutched the Furby like I'd just bought her a puppy. She named it Oliver before we even pulled into the driveway. The toy looked a little worn, but it wasn't falling apart. The fur had a few thin patches. One eyelid blinked slightly slower than the other, giving it a lazy, uneven look. It had that old plastic smell you get from toys that have spent too long in storage. But when we got home and Emma ran upstairs with it, it didn't feel like a problem. It felt like something easy, something normal. She found a pack of batteries in the drawer where we keep them, shoved them into the compartment with the confidence of a kid who has done it wrong 1,000 times, and somehow managed to get it working anyway. Oliver came to life with a sudden jerk, its eyes opening wide, and it started speaking in that weird nonsense language Furbies speak. Emma squealed and laughed and pressed its stomach over and over like she'd discovered a magic trick. For the next hour, she sat on her bedroom floor talking to it, while my wife and I made dinner downstairs. Every now and then we heard her laughter floating down the hallway, bright and carefree. At one point, she ran into the kitchen just to show us that if you tickled its stomach, it would dance. The Furby wobbled and shook on the counter, making choppy little noises. And Emma nearly fell over laughing. I remember thinking it might have been the best $2 I'd spent in a long time. That night, when I tucked Emma into bed, she asked if Oliver could stay in her room. It wasn't a big request. It wasn't like she was asking to sleep with a tablet under her pillow. It was just a toy. So I said yes. I placed the Furby on the dresser across from her bed, turned off the lights, and closed the door while she was already drifting off. It sat there in the dark, a small shape with big eyes, watching nothing. Sometime around 2 in the morning, I woke up because I thought I heard her talking. At first, I didn't get out of bed. Kids talk in their sleep. Emma had done it before. Sometimes it was just murmurs. Sometimes she'd say a full sentence that made no sense. It usually lasted a few seconds and stopped. But after lying there and listening, I realized the voice I was hearing didn't sound like Emma. It had that slightly mechanical tone toys make when the batteries are starting to die. That thin, scratchy sound like the speaker is struggling. It was quiet, but it carried through the hallway. I got up and walked to her room. When I opened the door, her room was dark, except for the small nightlight on the floor beside her bed. The soft glow made the furniture look unfamiliar, like shapes in a diorama. Emma was asleep under the blanket, breathing slowly, her face relaxed and peaceful. The Furby was sitting on the dresser exactly where I'd left it. Then its eyes opened. It didn't do it gradually the way it did during the day. It snapped open like something waking up suddenly. A second later, it made a soft giggling sound, low and muffled, as if it were trying not to be heard. I stood in the doorway for a moment, half irritated, and half creeped out, trying to decide if I was overreacting. It was an old toy from a flea market. It probably had a loose connection. It probably turned itself on when the battery shifted. I walked in, picked it up, and opened the battery compartment. I took the batteries out and set them on the dresser. Then I put the Furby back down. Its eyes closed immediately. The toy went quiet. Problem solved, I thought. End of story. The following night, I heard it again. This time it wasn't laughter. It sounded like whispering, very faint, like someone speaking under their breath. I woke up and lay still, listening, feeling my skin tighten. The sound was definitely coming from Emma's room, and it wasn't Emma's voice. I got out of bed and walked down the hallway again, telling myself maybe the batteries hadn't been completely dead. Maybe there was still enough juice for it to sputter out a few sounds. When I opened Emma's door, the room looked exactly as I'd left it. Nightlight glowing, Emma asleep, dresser across the room. Except the Furby wasn't on the dresser. For a moment, I thought Emma must have knocked it over earlier and I hadn't noticed. Kids are messy. Toys end up on floors. It happens all the time. Then I saw it. It was sitting on the floor near the foot of her bed, perfectly upright like someone had placed it there on purpose. And it was facing the doorway. Its eyes were open. The whispering stopped the instant I stepped into the room, like a radio being switched off. I picked it up and opened the battery compartment again, checking it with the kind of careful focus you get when you're trying not to panic. It was empty. No batteries, nothing. I stood there in the dim light, listening to Emma breathe, waiting for any other sound. After a long minute, I set the toy back on the dresser and went back to bed. In the morning, everything felt less strange, the way things always do in daylight. The human brain loves daylight. It smooths rough edges. It makes you feel silly for being scared of shadows. Emma woke up cheerful and carried Oliver downstairs, talking to it even though it didn't respond. She treated it like it was listening. She set it beside her cereal bowl. She carried it with one arm while she wandered through the house. My wife and I cleaned, and the day passed without anything else happening. Emma kept pressing the toy's stomach now and then, trying to make it talk again. Without batteries, it stayed quiet, and after a while, even I started to relax. Maybe the night before had been a half dream. Maybe it had fallen and landed upright in a way that made it look intentional. At some point in the afternoon, Emma asked if we'd seen our neighbor's cat. It was a big orange tabby that wandered everyone's yards like it owned the neighborhood. It usually ended up sleeping in a patch of sun near our back fence. I told her I hadn't seen it that day and didn't think much about it. That evening, after dinner, I took the Furby out of Emma's room and put it in the hallway closet. I didn't tell her why, not the real reason. I just said Oliver probably needed a rest for the night. She looked disappointed but didn't argue, which felt like a small win. Kids don't usually accept disappointment that easily, so I took what I could get. Sometime after 1 a.m, I woke up to a faint rustling sound coming from the yard behind the house. It was warm enough that we'd left the bedroom window open, and sounds travel in the dead of night. The rustling was uneven, like something moving through grass, stopping, shifting, moving again. At first, I lay in bed listening, trying to decide if it was just an animal along the fence line. Then I heard whispering again. It was the same thin murmur I'd heard the night before, except now it drifted through the open window from outside. It didn't sound like a person talking normally. It sounded like a toy speaker trying to form words that didn't quite fit. I got up and went downstairs to the back door. The moment I stepped outside, the sound stopped. The yard was still. The grass barely moved in a faint breeze coming through the alley behind the houses. I walked along the fence line, scanning the shadows, looking for glowing eyes or movement. I didn't see anything out of place. After a minute or two, I went back inside and closed the door, telling myself it was probably just a stray animal passing through. A raccoon, maybe. A cat. Something normal. The next morning, our neighbor knocked on the door. He looked tired. His voice was tight when he asked if we'd seen his cat. Apparently, it hadn't come home for more than a day. I told him Emma had asked about it too, but I hadn't seen it. He asked if I could help him look. Of course I did. We walked around the yard, checking the fence line behind the shed, around the bushes, places a cat might hide. We found it near the back corner of the yard. Something had gotten to it during the night. The orange fur was flattened into the dirt. The body was torn up badly enough that my brain tried not to fully register it. My neighbor just stood there, staring, then let out a quiet sigh and rubbed the back of his neck. Neither of us said much at first. There wasn't anything useful to say. The strange part was that nothing about it made sense for our neighborhood. We don't live near woods. We don't have coyotes roaming around here. The dogs on the street are family pets. This wasn't the kind of thing you expect in a fenced suburban yard. My neighbor muttered that maybe a raccoon had done it, or maybe a coyote passed through, though neither of us had ever seen one anywhere nearby. It sounded like something he was saying because he needed an explanation, not because he believed it. We dug a small hole near the edge of his yard and buried what was left of the cat. Then we went back inside our own houses, both of us a little quieter than before. I didn't mention the whispering I'd heard outside. That afternoon, Emma colored in the living room while my wife cooked and moved around the kitchen. The Furby stayed in the hallway closet, and I tried not to think about it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself it was just an old toy and a horrible coincidence, and my sleep-deprived brain trying to connect dots that weren't connected. Later that evening, after Emma was in bed and my wife was upstairs getting ready for sleep, I heard whispering again. This time it wasn't outside, it was in the hallway. I stepped out of my study and stood still, holding my breath. The sound was faint, but it was there, coming from the closet door where I'd put the toy. I walked over and opened the closet. The whispering stopped immediately. Inside, the Furby sat on the shelf exactly where I'd placed it, like it hadn't moved at all. Its eyes were closed, but a second later they shut tighter, as if they'd been open and only now decided to pretend they weren't. Its beak twitched slightly, a tiny movement like something inside it had just finished shifting. For a moment, I could have sworn it had been looking straight at me before it went still. I reached in and picked it up. The battery compartment was still empty, but there were short strands of orange hair caught around the edge of its beak, trapped between the plastic seams, and something dark had dried at one corner like a smear. When I saw that orange fur, my stomach dropped so fast I felt sick. I stood there in the hallway holding the toy for a long time, turning it slightly under the light, trying to talk myself out of what my brain was screaming. Maybe Emma had rubbed it on the cat earlier and some hair stuck. Maybe it had gotten dirty at the flea market. Maybe I was seeing patterns where none existed. But the truth was, I didn't want it anywhere near my child. So later that night, after everyone was asleep, I took it outside. I walked a couple blocks down the street with the Furby tucked under my arm until I found a garbage bin behind a row of townhouses. I lifted the lid, dropped the toy in, made sure it landed near the bottom, and listened to the lid fall back into place. Then I went home and tried to breathe again. For the next 2 days, nothing happened. Emma asked about Oliver once or twice. I told her the same thing both times. It had stopped working, and I was going to take it somewhere to see if it could be fixed. She looked disappointed, but didn't fight me. She accepted it the way kids sometimes do when they believe adults know what they're doing. By the second evening, I'd almost convinced myself I'd made the whole thing bigger than it was. The cat could have been killed by something else. The whispering could have been pipes, wind, my own imagination. The hair could have come from anywhere. I was stressed, tired, and trying to protect my daughter, which makes your mind run wild. That night I was sitting in my study finishing up some work when I heard Emma laughing from down the hallway. Not a quiet giggle either. Full squeals of excitement. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor and walked toward her room, expecting to find her playing with something she wasn't supposed to have. When I stepped into her doorway, my blood went cold. Emma was sitting cross-legged on the carpet with Oliver in her lap. She looked up at me with a huge grin. "Daddy, thank you for fixing him." For a second, I couldn't speak. The Furby looked different. The thin patches in the fur were gone, It looked fuller, cleaner, almost new, like it had been brushed, like it had been fed. Emma held it up proudly. "See? He works again." Then the Furby made a small, choking sound. Something fell out of its beak and landed on the carpet between Emma's knees. Emma giggled like it was a magic trick. Oliver spit something out. I stared at the object on the floor. It was a feather, small, gray, and white. I forced my face into something that resembled a smile and crouched down. My throat felt tight. "Hey, I said gently, reaching for the toy. "Let me put some new batteries in him so he works properly again." She handed it over without thinking, still smiling. The moment I stepped into the hallway, I stopped pretending. I walked straight for the back door. Outside, the air was cool and quiet. I stood on the patio, holding the toy, trying to keep my breathing steady, trying not to look like a man about to lose his mind. That's when I noticed something near the edge of the grass. A small bird lay twisted on its side beneath the fence. A sparrow, I think. Feathers scattered around it like it had exploded. I stared at it for a long moment, then looked down at the Furby. Its eyes were open. The corners of its beak were slightly raised, and I could have sworn it was looking directly at me. I didn't go back inside. I walked straight to the shed at the back of the yard and set the toy down on the wooden workbench. For a few seconds, it sat there quietly, like a normal object. Then it made that faint whispering sound again, the thin murmur that always stopped the moment someone noticed it. I grabbed the hammer hanging on the wall and brought it down as hard as I could. Plastic cracked under the first blow. The second split the casing. I didn't stop. I kept swinging until it was nothing but broken pieces scattered across the workbench. Fur and plastic and tiny gears exposed like guts. The whole time, the shed smelled like old wood and oil and my own sweat. When I finally stopped, my arm ached and my hands were shaking. I gathered the pieces into a box, drove out of the neighborhood, and didn't stop until I found a construction dumpster several streets away. I threw the box in as far as I could and didn't look back. By the time I got home, the house was quiet. Emma was asleep. My wife was sitting on the couch when I walked in. "Where'd you disappear to?" she asked. Emma wanted Oliver earlier. I shrugged and set my keys down with a hand that didn't feel like mine. "Yeah," I said. "It wasn't really fixed. I left it in the shed. I'll deal with it tomorrow." She watched me for a moment like she knew there was more, but she didn't push. Eventually, she nodded and let it drop, at least for the night. A few minutes later, I went upstairs and checked on Emma before going to bed. She was curled under her blanket, breathing softly. For the first time in days, the house felt still. The next morning, Emma left for school before I really had to face her questions. I stayed in the kitchen longer than usual while my wife helped her get ready, pretending to scroll on my phone while they talked by the front door. I expected Emma to ask about Oliver the second she saw me. She didn't. She left without saying anything about it, and that somehow made it worse. Like she'd already accepted something I hadn't explained. Like she knew not to ask. After the door shut, my wife stood there looking at me across the kitchen. She didn't say anything, but the look on her face made it clear she expected an explanation sooner or later. She also knew me well enough not to demand it immediately. I'm the kind of person who eventually talks when the words are ready. The day passed quietly. I tried to focus on work, but every time the house creaked or a car passed outside, I found myself listening for whispering, waiting for a sound that wasn't supposed to exist. Nothing happened. That evening, just before dinner, someone knocked on the door. When I opened it, a neighbor from a few houses down stood on the porch holding his phone. He looked uneasy, like he wasn't sure if he should be here. "Hey," he said. "This might sound weird, but my dog's collar has one of those tracker things on it. It's been missing since this morning, and the app keeps saying it's somewhere around here." I frowned and stepped outside with him. He showed me the map on his phone. A little blue dot sat almost directly on top of our house. "That doesn't really make sense," he admitted, glancing around the yard. But I figured I'd check before assuming the thing was broken. We walked around the property together, along the fence line. under the porch, around the bushes, near the shed. He checked places a dog collar could reasonably fall or be dragged. There was nothing. Eventually, he sighed and shrugged, forcing a laugh like he wanted to pretend it was no big deal. He said the tracker must be glitching. We talked for another minute, then he walked back down the street, still staring at his phone like it was lying to him. I didn't tell him about the cat, or the bird, or the Furby. That night, I couldn't sleep. Sometime after midnight, I found myself standing by the bedroom window, staring out at the yard. It was the same view I'd watched the night I heard rustling outside. The grass looked flat and harmless in the faint glow from the streetlights. The fence line cut the darkness into neat sections. Everything looked normal. For a long time, nothing moved. Then, I saw it. The Furby was sitting in the middle of the lawn, perfectly upright, not moving, just sitting in the grass like it had been placed there for display, its head tilted slightly back as if it were staring up at the sky. For a second, I genuinely thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and stared harder. The toy lowered its head. Even from the window, I could see the shape of its eyes catching light, the curve of its beak. It looked like it was smiling. Then it jerked once, the way it did when its internal gears started to turn. Something dropped out of its mouth and fell into the grass. I watched it land, a small shape that didn't bounce like a feather. When the Furby lifted its head again, the thing on the lawn caught the light. It was a dog collar. The metal tag glimmered in the moonlight, slick with something wet. My mouth went dry. My hands gripped the window frame so hard my fingers hurt. The Furby turned its head slightly, and for a moment, I had the unmistakable feeling that it was looking straight at me, through the glass, through the dark, like distance didn't matter at all. Then it blinked.